Welcome everyone to Fueled by Coffee Podcast, Season 4. My name is Matt. I'm your host. Thanks for stopping by. I hope you enjoy your stay. Today we have a returning guest from last season. I'm joined by my old co-worker Rob, aka Robitussin. If you listen to the Peapod episodes, or even I did an episode with Mike about a year ago, probably last summer. He was one of our grand co-workers from Peapod. Lots of memories there. We're actually going to touch on that in a little bit. So Rob, welcome back. Your episode did really well last season. So
really? That's a surprise.
Yeah, a lot of people thought they were like, Rob is really interesting. Like, people loved hearing your episode. And even like one of my favorite like synthwave, vaporwave music artists, he like shared it to his story on Instagram. That is like,
really?
Just like out of nowhere. Yeah, I think it's because we were talking about like the retro kind of stuff, like Transformers, 80s, you know. And yeah, like just totally out of nowhere one day, I saw it on his Instagram, and I was like, that's amazing. So Rob's a fan favorite now.
That is absolutely shocking to me, because I legitimately think I'm pretty boring.
well, I mean, you got people who love you, Rob. So welcome back to the pod. We got a lot to talk about today, but as always, if you're new to the podcast, make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Fueled by Coffee Podcast. We have merch. We also have an email newsletter that we're starting up, so sign up for that. And as always, drinking coffee today. Today, this is one I haven't had on the podcast in a while. It is the Bones Coffee Company Jelly Donut flavored coffee. I drank it a few times last season, and one thing I want to do this season, I'm trying to actually describe the coffee. I've always been afraid to do that because, you know, there's some coffee snobs out there who know a lot more than I do. But on the one episode I recorded not too long ago, my friend Pete was like, what does the coffee actually taste like other than just good? Because I said, oh, it's pretty good. And he goes, well, how does it taste other than good? So for those who don't know, Bones does all sorts of silly coffee flavors in addition to some, you know, like normal coffees. This jelly donut one, I wouldn't say it's like a dark roast. I think it's more of like a light to medium. It doesn't have too much bite behind it, but to really unlock its flavor, because I've drank it black before, you kind of have to put like a vanilla creamer in, something that's like really neutral, and it brings out the donut flavor. So today I am drinking vanilla cannoli creamer, or it's like vanilla cannoli latte or something creamer in the jelly donut coffee. So it's tasting pretty good right now. Rob, I see you are drinking a coffee as well.
Oh yeah, nothing as fancy pants as you, but I'm drinking just your standard Folgers blend, whatever that is. But I make it whenever I've got the time to. I make it inside of a French press,
beautiful type
deal, and even like the most baseline coffee tends to taste a little bit better when you make it in a French press. At least that's my experience.
No, French press is like the way to go. My brother-in-law always makes me French press coffee when I'm hanging out with him. And it's definitely like up there for sure. But without further ado, let's jump in. So Rob, you and I worked together at Peapod. For those who don't know, that was like my first real job as, you know, breaking into the adult world after high school. I've done a couple episodes on it with Mike, one of our other coworkers. There was all sorts of wackiness that went on there. So if you want to, I guess, go listen to them. I'm not a huge fan of the original 2 Peapod episodes for certain reasons, but Mike and I touched on it on our last episode when we were together. But Rob, what do you remember from your time at Peapod? What do you want the masses to know?
Well, I mean, honestly, I really wanted to get into this because I listened to those the trio of Peapod episodes, and it was like having a Vietnam flashback at certain points.
That's what you said. Yeah, Rob, I get this text from Rob, for those who don't know, and he's like, God, I listened to the Peapod episodes. I love them, but I was having like a Vietnam PTSD episode. It was it was great.
It was just like, oh my God, I forgot about that fucking thing, and then that thing, and oh my God, I can't believe that happened. It was like, honestly, it was like we were in a foxhole together, like 15 years ago.
Yeah, it's crazy, and it's wild when you have those jobs where like you you have those relationships and those bonds you form with people when you get close. Because I would say like our group of people, like 8 to 10 people that we worked with, it was very much like a family or like a military unit where like, yeah, you're in you're foxhole buddies pretty much.
Yeah, when you're sharing a stressful experience with people, it tends to pull people together. So, again, like you brought up earlier, I came up briefly in those episodes when you referenced, we were going through everyone's nicknames. I came up, and I found that really interesting because I very rarely get an account of like what people think of me in a workplace without them telling me. I usually told like second, third, fourth hand by other people.
Yeah.
Because bottom line, I mean, I told you this. I don't consider myself all that interesting. So I'm shocked. I'm always shocked when people find me notable, especially in an old job, and especially in a not bad way.
Right.
And what I remember from that podcast was that I was described as often being in another world. That's the way I seemed.
Yes. Hey, I mean, we had to be honest there because it always looked like you were. I think you and I have talked about this before, a little off topic, but like, I remember the one time I had said to you at work, like, I feel like I always get so many ideas, like either musically or writing wise, while I'm here at work, and then I forget all of them by the time I get home. And you had said something about it being like your brain is on autopilot, you know? So you it just kind of has like free realm to like just think and roam.
Yeah, you're running all of your creative processes sort of in the background.
Right.
At least that's how I sort of perceive it.
Right.
And every so often something will surface and then it's like, oh shit, I didn't think of it that way.
Yeah.
Or, you know, but yeah, more often than not, it was just by the fact of I'm so fucking bored.
Yeah.
I will think about anything else. And Mike even said he would see me just like stop what I was doing, look up at the ceiling, smile and laugh to myself.
Yeah.
And yeah, that I had to laugh at that because that's exactly what the fuck was going on.
Yes.
In general, it was such a boring job and it was like hard work too.
Yeah. You
were lifting shit all the time. You were trying to, make good time with whatever we were doing. It was just like, all right, I'm going to check out 80% of my brain and send it elsewhere.
Yeah.
And that's just what it was. I couldn't argue. I can't argue with that assessment of my thing. And then more often than not, I think someone would come up and ask me a question, and then I would say whatever was on my brain at the moment. It's like, good for you, buddy, and then go back to whatever they were doing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that can be applied because, I mean, you worked for Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
We
went through that.
The evil overworld.
Yeah.
You worked for Amazon before Peapod, and I think that whole going on autopilot can be applied to just warehousing in general, because after Peapod, I went to a larger warehouse, Stitch Fix, which, if y'all haven't heard the Men at Work episode, go check it out. But yeah, and that's how I would get there, because it was crazy, like going from Peapod, which was like a smaller operation. We were busy too, to this operation like Peapod. We were shipping like 250 orders a day max, and then I get to Stitch Fix and we're shipping 11,000 orders a day, on like a normal day, and you're running around and like it's so boring because you're just doing the same thing over and over. And I would check out like that too, because I think Peapod was a little different because we all had each other, whereas like Stitch Fix and also management didn't pay any attention to us, so it was basically like we just did whatever we wanted. We got our work done, but we were in our own little world. Whereas like at Stitch Fix, you had to hit rate and you barely had enough time to do it. Like by the time 3:30 rolled around, I was like just hitting my goal or just exceeding it. But yeah, I would check out mentally, and like, like if I was playing a certain video game, I'd be like game planning what I was going to do later that day when I got home. Like, okay, I'm going to do this, this, and that on the, so it's like, it's just the nature of the job, I think.
Yeah, Peapod was a little bit more unique than that because I don't know how big your warehouse was at Stitch Fix, but Amazon in and of itself, it was just like, especially if you were up in the storage decks,
Okay.
You could run an entire shift without seeing someone else on your shift.
Oh, wow.
That like you want to talk to.
That's wild.
But in Peapod, we were all sort of on a loop, especially when we were doing it, because they were starting to change things a little bit when I left.
Right.
Like they were starting, because there was the chill and dry, and when you were in chill, which is what we were most of the time, you would loop around and pass the same 15, 20 people all day, or they would pass you, and then you would talk between each other while you were working on a thing.
Yeah.
And then pick it up. And if you got sent somewhere else, you would just pick up the conversation the next time they passed you.
Right.
So I feel like you did end up making a bit more of a connection in that circumstance, at least in my head.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I don't think I've ever had a job really that reached that level of like connection and kinship with my coworkers, you know, especially with like now like baking, and I go in so early, and like I'm kind of just like that guy that goes in the middle of the night and like just makes stuff appear, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting environment to be in. One thing I never touched on though, and I wanted to bring it up today. Do you remember the holidays, working the holidays at Peapod?
I try not to whenever I can, because retail in general, for anyone listening to this who has not worked a retail job, is brutal during the holidays, Christmas especially, and God forbid you work in a food retail environment during like Thanksgiving or Christmas or what have you.
Yeah,
you get people who buy a fuck ton of groceries.
I remember how they would load up the section that had the hams. Oh God, it was like a good 6 to 8 feet of just hams piled up like on the shelf, or like turkeys. Sometimes I think those were mainly frozen. But
am I misremembering this? But they would have just like a cooler full of turkeys and or hams.
Nope, that was a thing. That was most certainly a thing. Yeah.
Okay, because there was, I mean, honestly, there was no room on the shelves where we were to hold the amount of turkeys or hams or what have you for these holidays. And God forbid you get saddled with the order for the people holding like a multi-family event.
Oh, yeah.
You were fucked for like an hour, if not more.
Yeah. Well, and that was the thing, too. They, in addition to having like individual hams and turkeys, which sometimes like, to piggyback on your point, some people would buy like one of each or like 2 turkeys. And like the thing that people I don't think realize, or at least if you've never listened to the Peapod episodes, is like we had these totes that you could only fit so much in, because if you put too much in, management would come yell at you. And like, so like if you got like 2 turkeys, that was a tote, that was done. But like they also had, I remember, these meal kits that people could get for the holiday, where it came with like the meat, the potatoes, the vegetables, the rolls. It was like this whole big thing. Yeah. And yeah, it was absolutely ridiculous. And you always knew, because it was always around Halloween, that first turkey got ordered, and you're like, it's coming. And then one morning you show up and the freezer is just full of turkeys, and it's like, well, we're screwed. Yep.
And then fuck, that sort of like, because it was a weight issue. We couldn't make the totes more than a certain weight.
Yes.
I mean, there was no scale or anything to weigh it. It was just sort of like you kind of had to judge it by your own experience after a time.
Yeah.
And there were, I think one of the rules was you couldn't have more than 2 gallons of a substance, of a liquid substance in a tote at a time, because it just got too heavy.
Yeah.
And I think there was always one person a week that got like 8 gallons of iced tea. And I think you remember the person too.
Oh yeah.
And it happened every week. And someone every week always got that order, and we were just like, well, looks like that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
You would end up having a obscene number of totes that you just had to drop.
Yeah.
And wait and have someone come collect.
Yeah. I think it was after you left, they had changed the picking system over. I think it was very early 2018. They changed it over, and so like we wouldn't scan the totes off it was like the computer, they had weighed every item that we sold, and the computer would determine what was going in each tote. And so I thought it was kind of ironic because at that point they had us putting 3 gallons in a tote. And I was like, we got crucified for doing this for so long, and now that the computer says it's okay, now we can do it. It's nuts. I don't know. Oh man.
Okay, and also I have notes. I wrote notes for this whole thing just so I wouldn't forget anything.
Go for it.
Okay, so there was, who was the guy who would, on break, he would just destroy an entire chicken or a frozen meal or something, because we only had 15 minutes.
Yeah.
He would annihilate this thing and then go back to work.
Okay, so I don't know if this is before I started, but after I started, there was Brad, who Mike and I worked with, and I don't know if he would do like a whole chicken, but he would bring a giant tub of leftovers. But then there was also, I've heard about him many a times, it's like folklore for Peapod. There was a guy that Mike nicknamed Shit Boy, who he said would eat like a whole rotisserie chicken or like a whole thing of Chef Boyardee, like the big family-sized can, like on his 15-minute. I wasn't there for that, but Mike, I've heard so many stories about him.
I think it was Brad, because that name sounds familiar, but it might just be one of the other ones. But it was just a spectacle watching this guy. Yeah. I would sit there. I would eat my whatever. I would just have like a protein bar or something like that.
Or like I remember your snack was like hummus and carrots or something.
It would just be like a quick thing, just like eat and get in my system, and to go back, because you can't really do much in 15 minutes. Let's be real here. Yeah. But a good portion of the rest of my break, once I was done eating, was just watching this fucking happen. Just watching him abuse whatever food he had placed in front of him.
That was definitely Brad.
Okay. I mean, I never had a problem with Brad.
No.
In and of itself. It was just, God damn, man, how do you even manage?
Well, that was the thing. Like, Mike and I loved working with Brad because he was a hard worker. He was a really nice kid. I would talk about the Eagles with him or wrestling or whatever. Really, really nice guy. But as soon as he got cut loose in the break room, it was like watching Animal Planet or National Geographic or something. Oh, my God. Yeah, Big Gator. Holy shit. Yeah. Good times. Anything else you want to hit on before we move on?
Oh man, no, I honestly can't think of. That was just, honestly, I just wanted to bring up, like, just circle back on that because of what I heard in the Peapod episodes, because I couldn't. You know what? I couldn't ignore it.
Yeah.
Because it's like I said, it was like we were in a foxhole together. We shared an experience, and it was what it was. And also, I very rarely get to discuss how I am perceived at a job that I worked with someone. Yeah. It was interesting.
Yeah. Well, you were one of the crew, man. Like, I feel like most of the people that were in, like, that little crew, it was, we generally we favored because of those experiences we shared. Though I remember, just one last thing before we move on about Brad. I remember, I think the way that it started, it was like word was spreading by... It was spreading by word of mouth, because I think Morgan came to me and was like, "Oh my God, have you seen this guy eat?" And I was like, "No." Oh
Morgan.
DJ
I remember Morgan. Fuck. Sorry, finish it. I have an anecdote after this, but continue your thing.
So I remember her coming to me and she was like, "Have you ever seen Brad eat?" And I was like, "No, not really. Like, I don't really pay attention." And then she was like, "You gotta watch him," and because I think he had like Buffalo Wild Wings or something like that, and he decimated a shit ton of wings one day in 15 minutes. So then I was watching him, and then I told Mike, and I was like, "Yo, have you ever seen Brad eat?" And Mike always went out to his car and like meditated on his breaks, but I remember he stopped in one day just to see, and he literally told me on the podcast, he was like, "Yeah, I watched him eat for about 5 minutes," and I was like, "Oof, that's enough of that," just like.
I remember this whole exchange, because I feel like we all like locked eyes at one point, and we were just like, Yeah. Just watch. It's happening.
It's happening. Yeah, that's awesome.
So believe it or not, I had like sort of a ships passing in the night kind of situation with Morgan not too long ago.
Oh, that's weird.
It was I was shopping at the Giant in Quakertown.
The one across from the porn store?
Maybe it's like right in the same plaza as the Lowe's.
Yeah, that's the one that I used to make donuts at.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've since left, but yes, I used to work there.
So yeah, I was just shopping. I had just come from Q Mart. I was getting some shit that I couldn't get there.
Yeah.
And I was walking through one of the aisles, and I had my mask on.
Mm.
I was walking in, and I saw Morgan, but I was like, I didn't clue in really. I was like, she looks really familiar. Who the fuck is that? And like, she saw me, I saw her, and we just sort of like looked at each other. And I don't think either one of us placed her because, one, you can see my face.
Yeah.
And I wasn't quite sure who she was. So we weren't sure. It's like, do I know you? And then we got to we were passing, like, you know, and we each got to the end of the aisle. And I was like, wait a minute. And we looked back and we like locked eyes. Oh, it's you. And then we, like, as we were turning, but it's too late at that point to like, it's like, oh, hey, what have you been doing? And then I guess we were in like different circuits around the thing because I didn't pass her again after that. But she seemed to be doing well. Yeah. I don't know how recently you've seen her, but yeah.
It's funny. I had a similar experience. It was it was like 2.5 years ago. It was the summer of 2019. I remember I was at the Target in Quakertown with my brother-in-law and my nephew, and we were literally walking in the doors and just like walking towards like the video game section, and I hear my name get called, and I'm like, who the fuck? Like, who is that? I turn around, and I'm like, oh shit, it's DJ Morgan. I haven't seen you in almost a year. Like, yeah. So that was the last time I saw Morgan, I think. It's always cool when stuff like that happens, though. Like when you just run into people that, you know. I'm still waiting to run into like Mouse somewhere. Oh, dude, I ran into Terry. Do you remember Terry?
Who refresh my memory?
So she was the one that Mike was always harassing, the pterodactyl.
Oh yeah,
it is what it is, man.
Yeah, okay, so, I remember her. So
I was driving home. It was I don't know exactly when it was. It might have been right before COVID started. I was driving home past our old giant Coopersburg, and I thought I saw Doug's car in the parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, Doug might be in there because he works for this coffee company, and I thought he was like maybe making a delivery. So I was like, oh, I got to stop in and see if Doug's in there. So I pulled in, and who's smoking a cigarette out by the door? Terry. And I went up to her, and I was like, what's up, man? And she was like, what the hell are you doing here? You know, like it was one of those things. But yeah, it's awesome when stuff like that happens.
Mm-hmm. I on occasion, whenever I'm back in New Jersey visiting family, I stop by one of my old jobs. It was Joanne Fabrics, which I still really enjoy that place even now because it's just I craft things. It's fun to go in there and look around to see what's what.
Sure.
That was the last job I had before I moved out here to Pennsylvania, and I got on really well with this elderly lady named Diane, who often had a foul temper when it was dealing with customers.
Yeah.
But we got along really well. So I stopped in and I like came up behind her. I was like, "Excuse me, miss, can you help me find the tool fabric?" And she spun around, ready to like be like, "You what?" And then and she saw me and I was like, "Oh my God, it's you!" And we hugged.
Yeah.
It was nice to see. We talked for like another half hour and ignored customers. It was great.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's again the beauty of working. I think it's those retail settings. I mean, working in retail, my experience, like baking for Giant and now like baking for the company I bake for, the people were assholes. And the people I work with now, for the most, I have maybe like 2 people that I talk to regularly, assholes. I work with a bunch of women. All they want to do is talk about each other, and it's really annoying.
Is your position like customer facing, or are you just like a purely behind the house kind of guy?
Like right now, I'm kind of just like, so like our oven is pretty far back in the department. So if anyone needs anything, I kind of like try and let the people in front of me deal with them, unless there's really no one there.
Gotcha.
My last job, I briefly baked bread for Wegmans because they were doing scratch baking. And I was like, all right, I got to get out of Giant. This place is a shithole. So I went to Wegmans and I learned how to like make bread completely from scratch. And like,
nice.
It was super fun. Like, it was brutal at first to learn and figure everything out. But then like once I got it down, it was awesome. And then 2 months into me working there, they got rid of scratch baking. And I was like, well, that defeats the purpose of me coming here. So I kind of, and like the job I have now popped up. So I just took it. And it's just a till I move thing, But Wegmans was closer to a Peapod because I had people there that I was like not close with, but like I actually had people to talk to while I worked. But that was definitely more customer facing, because like the table I was working on the bread on, like when customers would come in after the store opened, there was just like a window in front of my table, so people could literally stand there and watch me working on bread if they wanted to.
That's not unnerving.
I felt like I was in a zoo, basically. You know?
Yeah.
It gave me anxiety at first, but I just got so used to it, and I was like, it got to the point where I was like, yeah, bitch, watch me make this bread. Mm-hmm. But anyways, so let's move forward. Peapod,
yeah.
Great times, great memories, some great people.
Yeah.
The main subject of today's episode, though, is something that Rob is, I would say, passionate about. He brought it up last time we recorded. That is cryptids. Rob, what is a cryptid for those who do not know?
Well, I mean, a cryptid, at least in my thing, is like one of those creatures that a lot of people see just sort of like in the shadows or in the forest, something legendary like Bigfoot or the Chupacabra or the Loch Ness Monster, things like that.
Yeah. Where did this interest of yours start? Was there a certain age you remember like this piquing your interest, or?
Well, to be honest, I've always been sort of like I've always been a enthusiast, a fan of things that are strange and unusual, going back as far as I can think of. I was obsessed with like ghosts when I was a kid.
Okay.
And these things, cryptids in particular, are just one of those things where they almost definitely don't exist, at least the way people like. There's almost definitely not a Bigfoot,
yeah,
or a Loch Ness Monster, but they're just these things that seem to persist over time,
right?
And they're weird, and
yeah.
they're atypical, and that's sort of what draws me to them.
Right. It's almost like the existence of aliens, but like I definitely think there's aliens, but like
Bigfoot.
Yeah. I'm not so sure there's a Bigfoot. I hope there's a Bigfoot. That'd be really cool. But like,
yeah.
You know,
it's a weird thing, because you always get these. I mean, I've probably listened to more than my fair share of like stories on on various creatures, and no matter what, even people who ostensibly don't know about these things seem to encounter them. So there's something persistent about whatever these things are, whether they are real, or if it's just, if you want to get really weird and esoteric about it, just some sort of manifestation of the collective unconscious or something of that type.
Right.
Like there's the like I said, the Chupacabra, which translates to the goat sucker, which is a Hispanic, like Southern and Central American type creature, which it's generally depicted as kind of as a hairless, kind of like golem looking thing with back spikes and fangs that drains the blood from livestock.
Right.
Or, I mean, everyone knows Bigfoot. It's a big, hairy ape kind of creature.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, if you go back far enough, there were big, hairy fucking ape creatures.
Oh, yeah.
Just kind of around. Neanderthals. Oh, fuck. I mean, there's tons of creatures that were like that at one point. And historically and scientifically speaking, we did share the planet with Neanderthals for a certain amount of time, to the point where there is a little bit of Neanderthal DNA in all of us, because there was some cross-pollination going on. Yeah. And they actually think that in most redheads that are around now, that gene for red hair comes from Neanderthals.
Oh, that's interesting. I never knew that.
Plus, there's a lot of other quote-unquote junk DNA in our biology that they don't know where it came from exactly, but they're pretty sure it came from other early hominids. It's just that we're the ones that sort of stuck around. Right. For various reasons, all sorts of different reasons.
Yeah.
The one I am like most familiar with, and this is probably because of where I grew up, which is in New Jersey, is the Jersey Devil.
Right.
And that one is, for anyone who has heard of this and has never been to New Jersey, or you know, hasn't heard of any of it, New Jersey is a weird fucking place. I mean, it's not like on a Florida level, but I feel like every state, everywhere has, look.
For Pennsylvania, it's eerie, okay?
Okay.
Erie, PA is like, ugh, don't want to go there.
Yeah, there's I feel like everywhere has like a certain quotient of weirdness. The world is a weird place.
Oh, hell yeah.
The universe is a weird place. Like, there's shit that we still don't even know what the deal is. In New Jersey, there is an area, it's around central and southern New Jersey, called the Pine Barrens. And that in and of itself is it's a strange place inside of a strange place.
Right.
It is a place where towns were founded in like the mid 20th century, and a lot of them don't exist anymore. They just sort of faded out. They just faded away, slowly being absorbed back into the Pine Barrens. Almost nobody lives there except for what are called Pineys, which are, I guess, like the rednecks of that area, the hill folk.
Yeah, when I was doing my research, I read about the Pineys.
They're one of my friends who's married to my wife's cousin. He does a construction work, and he comes into contact with them in a reasonable frequency. And he says they're all right. They're kind of weird, but they're what you would expect for a bunch of people who live in the middle of the fucking woods with little to no outside contact.
Right.
And the Pine Barrens, amongst other things that are there, we could probably do an entire episode on shit that goes on in the Pine Barrens, to be real. There's the Blue Holes, which are their own thing. There's all the disappeared towns. But the primary one that a lot of people in the state, basically everyone in the state, and a lot of people outside of the state know about is the Jersey Devil.
Right.
And it is a creature that is often described as like having horns, somewhat reptilian, somewhat horse-like in demeanor. It is apparently intelligent enough to evade capture, but a lot of the cryptids out there are apparently intelligent enough to evade capture for all these years.
Yeah.
It is the lore behind it is that it is the 13th child of the Leeds family, and Mrs. Leeds had 12 kids before that, all begotten by Mr. Leeds, who was a real son of a bitch. Didn't really stick around, didn't really do anything other than make more kids for her to take care of. So when she found out she was pregnant for the 13th time, she said, I give this child to the devil. May the devil take him. And when the child was born, it seemed normal enough initially, but then it rapidly mutated and changed into this horrifying creature that killed everyone in the room and exploded out into the Pine Barrens to terrorize all the people within and on the borderline of the Pine Barrens.
Right.
However, we know about it, so if it killed everyone in the room, we wouldn't know about it.
Yeah. Plot hole number 1.
Yep.
It's it's crazy, like the whole. Well, I want to get into like the skepticism then with this, with this whole thing. Or I don't know if you read up or if you knew about any of like some of like the more, I guess, famous sightings of it, like some of the people who have cited.
Not specifics.
Because when I was reading into it, it was saying like military servicemen from, I want to say like the Revolution. It said Napoleon's brother Joseph saw it at some point. And then it said there were also just a lot of livestock killings or like attempted killings of livestock. So I guess it wasn't the chupacabras thing too, was like the livestock dying. It seems to be kind of a recurring theme with certain, creatures.
Yeah, it's also, see, here's the thing. We're humans, at least in my estimation of it, we're creatures that like to have reasons for everything in a illogically working, sometimes unfair, sometimes reasonless world.
Right.
Where shit can happen to you and there is no obvious reason as to why. It could just be because you were there, or because whatever happened was there, and you were just, your number came up.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, and I'm not even talking about just the Jersey Devil. I'm talking about like a lot of other monsters and bizarre happenings throughout the years and the decades and the centuries.
Right.
If you lose a lot of livestock in a row, or your crops go bad, or you have a run of really bad luck, people often look for something to blame, even if there really is maybe there really is no reason for it. Maybe you just had a run of bad luck. Witches was often the big thing.
Yeah.
Or strange creatures, a la the Jersey Devil, the Chupacabra, all sorts of other things. But I mean, this often led to, posses being rounded up to try and hunt the thing, or witch burnings, or what have you.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody looked at somebody weird in town, or said something that they didn't quite catch. It's like, oh, she fucking cursed me.
Yeah.
Witch.
Yeah.
So we have a tendency to fabricate reasons for things as people.
Yeah.
And that's what I think a lot of these cryptids are. We're trying to find a reason for something happening.
Right.
We're trying to find something to blame.
Right. And I think it's really interesting too. I feel like a lot of these, not all of them, but a lot of these creatures have come to, like, these stories started not in like a modern society. It was always that kind of like old Englishy, or even older than that, and one of the things you had mentioned earlier about like imaginations running wild, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I had read about, like, the skepticism behind this is like the boogeyman stories that get passed down through generations, or the early English settlers, you know, because like the thing is not to say there wasn't any, there were very bright people at this time, but I feel like what is perceived is they were so few and far between. I feel like there was so much unknown, and maybe it was because they were new to the United States, and it was mostly unpopulated aside from Native Americans.
A basically empty land full of things both real and imagined that are trying to fucking kill you.
Yeah. And it's funny that you had said about witches, because with this, I actually wanted to bring up, have you ever seen the movie, I don't know if you're I'm not really into horror movies, but my girlfriend is.
It depends.
The Witch.
Is that a recent one? It sounds familiar.
I think it was within the last 3 years, I would say, maybe 5 years.
I try not to watch horror movies, or even like listen to true crime podcasts, because while I do find them fascinating, it gives my brain things to play with when I sleep.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I often, it's hard enough for me to sleep, man. So I don't need shit waking me up in the middle of the night. It's like, well, I just imagined somebody was standing over me in my bed.
Yeah.
I can't go back to sleep now.
Yeah. I'm right there with you. And the thing is like, we watched the first 2 Saw movies, and those are really good because they're more just like story driven, at least. I mean, the second one was almost like just forced gore, but it's not like a, okay, this could actually happen thing. I mean, it probably could. It's, but the thing is like watching The Witch. So normally horror movies don't really get to me because it's a lot of the time it's just a jump scare. You know, they get you with the music cues and the, whatever, the jump cuts. But then so like The Witch freaked me the fuck out. And like for days afterwards, because like the thing is I was still working overnight, so I'd get up for work at 1 a.m. I'd be walking through a dark house, I'd be driving in the middle of the night down back roads. And the thing is with The Witch, it takes place in like early America, like before it's even America, just when it's the settlers. And it has to do with this family who thinks their one daughter is a witch. And and the thing is it, very rural time, livestock, a farm, those early colonial towns. The thing is it hit on 3 different things for me. Early America, there's not as much information as we have now. There's none of this like instant news updates. It's like someone could die and no one would ever know where they went or how it happened.
You could literally go 2 towns over and be a whole different person.
Yeah. Farms freak me out. I'm sorry. Like, broad daylight, whatever, but like at night, dude, farms or like land or that type of shit freaks me out. I don't know why. I don't know how.
It's a large expanse of open land.
Well, yeah, and just like I guess there's a stereotype of like the chainsaw killer or the slaughterhouse and the pit, whatever.
Isolation.
Yeah. And just like the elements too, like the rusty farm equipment, it's a combination of things. So you got like early America where people aren't as knowledgeable about everything that's going on. You got like a farmland, absolutely terrifying. And then you have the witch, which had to do with demonic possession, which those are three things I do not fuck with. So it was one of those things where I could it was realistic enough. I mean, the end of the movie, not to spoil it for anyone, but like the end of the movie was kind of like more Hollywood. Like they're doing this like witch ritual and they're all like floating into the air, and it's like, okay, like that's where the Hollywood came in. But the whole rest of the movie before it, I was like, this could totally have happened, and this could be happening right now. It totally freaked me out, and like for a good week or two afterwards, it was freaking me out. So like, and it's that whole thing of like the imagination running wild and that early American, not as smart as we are now. It's, oh man.
There was that's an interesting take on this, because I'm positive you've heard of like the Salem Witch Scare,
yes,
that whole deal.
Did a whole unit on it in high school. Yeah.
Yep. So here's the thing. You don't mind me plugging another podcast on your podcast?
Go for it.
Okay, so there is a podcast called Unobscured.
Okay.
And the guy who does it does like a deep dive on multiple episodes long. Like I think that the Salem Witch Trials was like 13 or 14 episodes in and of itself.
Oh,
on it. It's one of the better ones I've ever listened to.
I'm gonna add it to my app right now.
Yeah. So he goes into like the psychology of the people at the time. He goes into like current events that were happening before and leading up to and during this whole thing.
Right.
And the bottom line is like, it goes back to like, the imagination is running wild. The people in the town at this time, they were in active conflict with the French because it was a rival colony, with the Indians.
Right.
They were on the borderline of the woods, of a basically fresh nation. Anything past the tree line, who knows what the fuck is in there trying to kill you. Could be Indians, could be Frenchmen, could be a monster, could be a bear.
Oh yeah.
All sorts of shit. And, at this time, people still believed in witchcraft, and the witches were the highly religious people. These were all, let's be real here, a lot of the original people that came over and started this country were religious extremists.
Oh yeah.
Who the crown heads of whatever country they came from didn't want to deal with them.
Yeah.
So they gave them a ship, gave them some supplies, and then just like, look, we found this new place, it's empty. Go over there and do what you want. Just pay your taxes and just be your weird selves over there. We don't want to deal with you.
Yeah.
So this was like they left everything that they knew. This is still like, some of these people are still first generation immigrants.
Yeah.
Like they just got here. The towns are, the towns are very new. Farms are very new. They are still in conflict with the natives. It is like, okay, there's a lot of shit here that if I leave my house with a gun, without a gun, I probably won't come back.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and, highly religious people just waiting for the devil to be around any corner to tempt them and take their mortal souls. They were, a lot of the times, just scared.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on.
Mm-hmm.
Much like now, there's a lot going on. People are fucking scared.
Yeah.
And they're looking for something to blame.
Right.
So if, you have one of those runs of bad luck, something is killing your cattle that you can't see, your crops fail, you want something to blame for it. Because it's just like, the world can't be this unfair to me. I am a faithful, I pray every day. I am faithful. I go to church every week, sometimes twice, just for good measure.
Yeah.
Something or someone has to be conspiring against me, so they look for a person. And this particular podcast goes into that. It is just like, oh man, these people, the bedrock for this whole phenomena was in place.
Oh yeah.
And they just needed a reason.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's again, I think it all just comes back around to they did not have an information overload. Like now, think about it. Something goes on with your crops, or whatever. You can look up on Google in a microsecond what's wrong with your crops and try and come to an answer. Whereas back then, all they had was their imagination and maybe their neighbor to be like
some anecdotes that maybe like their dad told them about, or their grandfather, or like you said, their neighbor who might not be the smartest guy.
Yeah, I think the freakiest thing too, like with this movie and the whole like possession and like the fear of the time, it was this crazy thing where like, oh man, I don't want to spoil the whole movie. I'm not going to spoil the whole movie.
I'm never going to watch it.
It's just
don't worry, you can spoil it for me.
It was one of those things. They had this goat, and it was this black goat, and I think his name was Black Phillip. And they kept saying that like the goat was possessed, and then they were like, no, the goat's not possessed. And then it was like they're blaming the daughter the whole time and saying she's possessed and she's not, because the baby goes missing in the woods. That's where it starts, and they're like, she killed the baby, the daughter killed the baby, like why would you do that? And then it ends up where the son, who's like, he's like a young boy, he gets possessed, and then they're like, oh my god, like it's your fault, you're a witch, this whole thing. And then it turns out that it's the goat who's possessed like the whole time. And like the last scene of the movie, it's because like her father, and the cool thing is how a lot of the time you'll have either a foreign movie or one of these movies that takes place back when Old English was a thing, and they're talking with a modern a modern American. They literally, I think they went out and they actually got English people, and they had them learn the dialect. So, or like some of we had to turn the subtitles on halfway through the movie because we couldn't understand what the fuck they were saying. Especially the father, but like at the end of the movie, the father like drags the daughter outside, and he's like, I'm locking you in with the goat because this is all your fault. Our son died, our baby died. He locks her, and she's like, I'm innocent. Locks her in with the goat, and then the goat starts talking to her. And the goat was possessed the whole time, and then the goat possesses her, and oh man, dude, it just free. And I remember we watched it late at night, and I was like, babe, I'm sorry, that honestly the scariest movie I've ever seen. But I think it plays well into this whole cryptids thing, right? Because I feel like they've all come from those older times. Because like, hasn't Nessie been a thing since like, oh yeah, God knows how long, the 1500s, maybe even older than that,
Oh yeah, it's been around for a while. You always almost every body of water, at least as far as I know, has like the legend of like a thing that was seen there one time.
Godzilla.
Yeah. Or again, here's another podcast where it's called Camp Monsters, which it's all about actual legitimate creatures that people see all the time. Oh shit, I just remembered this because here's the thing. I went to the last New York Comic Con. Okay. And I was in the artist alley, and I found these, which are, they are like basically cryptid trading cards.
Oh, word! That's super cool.
Like there's like the cornies, the boojum, a snipe. I mean, if you ever in Boy Scouts, you always had a snipe hunt. Let's see, the tree squeezer, which is like a snake that's like furry, and it'll like devour you if you get too close to it.
That's cool. I love stuff like that.
Yeah, it's like a set of like 12 things. I couldn't believe that these things were in there, but every region has like the creature that you will find in the woods, or will find you in the woods.
Yeah.
But sorry to like, I feel like I'm all over the place, so I apologize.
You're good.
There was one this sort of like dovetails into the cryptids thing. Do you know anything about like werewolf lore?
Not exactly. No, not entirely.
Like okay, I mean they're they're like vampires. The lore behind them has like shifted and evolved over time, but I didn't quite put the sometimes I like to just believe that a lot of these weird things are real because it's more fun that way. Things are more interesting.
Yeah.
There was, I guess you would call it a cryptid. Not necessarily. It was like a monster, I guess, that showed itself during World War I. Okay. Which is its own Look, if there was any war that I would really not want to be a part of, it's World War One. That was horrible.
Yeah.
In all sorts of different ways. But there was a big battle around a city called Mons. And what started happening is just every night over the course of a few weeks, this hound-like creature would just appear and take people on both sides. And they dubbed it the Hound of Mons. And both sides thought it was like some freakish secret weapon that the other side was employing. And nobody knows what the fuck it was, of course, because it showed up and ostensibly took a few people, and then it just stopped suddenly. And just I was looking up. I was thinking it was for a different project. I was looking up like werewolf lore. I think I was making like a werewolf hunting kit for someone. And it's like, okay, what are like the weaknesses of werewolves? What do they do? What can they? And apparently, anecdotally, if a werewolf, someone who is a werewolf, is killed in their human form, they will return every night and kill people until the body is either dismembered or buried. So, just for funsies, let's assume that this legend was real in a certain way, because in the early to mid 1900s, turn of the century, a lot of the world was still sort of, we were sort of on the borderline between the modern age and industrialization and like folksy times, because there were still a lot of isolated parts in the world where lore and stories still held a lot of sway, let's say. What if, let's assume that this thing was real, like werewolves are real, or at least rare in those days. Someone who had that element in their body, whether they knew about it or not, got killed. Every night they would come back, take someone as the Hound of Mons, and because of the war, and that was very artillery based, entire landscapes would get changed overnight due to an artillery bombardment. It was nuts. It was often described as the ground boiling. There were so many. Let's say, there was a particularly heavy bombardment one night. Their body got blown apart and or buried, and then that was the end of it. Just like a weird anecdote from wartime. Right. Weird shit happens in wartime. It was just weird one-off things that never happen again, but that stick around due to word of mouth. Right. Or things like that. That dovetails very nicely into cryptid shit, paranormal shit. I love that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's wild, man. And it's too, like, again, these all formulated before the age of information, and now, like, even that we're in the age of information, because we weren't there, we don't know. So all we have are these stories, and it's cool because it creates interesting conversations like these.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, we've sort of gone in the opposite direction. The world as it is we have basically the library of 10 times the Library of Alexandria, the focal point of all of our cultural knowledge in our pocket, right, or within arm's reach at all times. So, I mean, what if you have access to unlimited information at any given time? What is the best way to hide or obscure information that you don't want out there? Is you just put too much of it out there.
Yeah, we are in the age of information, but there's so much misinformation because it's so easy for anyone to put information out there. It's crazy. And with censorship, it's nuts. That's a whole different discussion for a whole different day. Either way, Rob, this has been a very interesting episode. I think almost as interesting, if not as interesting as our last episode. Always something quirky to bring to the table when we chat. Whether it's collectibles or the unknown. But again, thank you for coming on. Thank you to everyone who listened. Give us a follow here on SoundCloud if you like what you heard, or review us if you're listening from an external app. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Buy some merch. Sign up for the email newsletter. The next episode will come in 2 weeks. I'm going to be talking with my friend Tyler, who was on I think he was on the Blink-182 album review. Tyler's going to be on. We're going to be talking about his band Second Suitor, and we're going to talk about professional wrestling, two of our loves, music and wrestling. So tune in the next 2 weeks for the next episode.